Welcome to another edition of Labor TV, brought to you by the Cowlitz-Wahkiakum Central Labor Council. And this is the show where working people and union members can get together and talk about our side of the story and get our message out there. Today we have a special guest, our friend Lori Province from the State Labor Council, the field director for the State Labor Council. And of course, Rick Von Rock, who's a retiree with the AWPPW 153 out of Fiber, formerly Fiber. And I'm Kyle Mackey, and I am the president of the Cowlitz-Wahkiakum Labor Council. And today we're going to go over a few things. We're going to talk about the Shared Prosperity Agenda. That is the Washington State Labor Council's agenda for the 2014 legislative season. Yep. And we're also going to let Lori talk about right to work a little bit and give a more in-depth, hopefully, explanation of what right to work for less will do for Washington and the area, Oregon included. But right now, before I forget, we're going to do a couple current events. We're going to talk about Volkswagen. Just had a vote that's been coming for a long time down there in Tennessee, and they were trying to form a union down there. Turns out Volkswagen is a pretty labor-friendly company coming out of Germany. They have what's called a works council, and labor union members are represented as 50% of this council. They get quite a bit of say on the directive of the company and the outcomes in the future. And so when this vote went down in Tennessee, which is a anti-union state, the company was neutral, and however the government, the state government, pushed real hard and said some things that were pretty intimidating, wouldn't you say, Lori?
I'd say they were, considering that the UAW subsequently filed charges afterwards, I'd say that somebody thinks that they were substantive.
Yeah, I think that it's like getting back to this Boeing thing that just happened too. You know, there was quite a bit of pressure put on by the state government and elected officials to sway the election one way or another. And, you know, it seems like it's becoming a plague lately. Have you heard about this whole Volkswagen thing, Rick?
Yes, I have, and I was kind of discouraged on the position that the senator of that state and the governor took as well by threatening Volkswagen on the promises that they made to Volkswagen concerning a tax subsidy. They said if this was to pass, they would pretty much negate the deal they had in providing the tax breaks. And if that is an economic blackmail and a threat to the poor employees that are working there, that perhaps they might lose their jobs because they were no longer going to have the tax subsidies. That is truly, truly a shameful way for a government to interfere with the business of labor and other non-political entities such as Volkswagen.
Now, Lori, can you tell me, I'm trying to remember what the NLRB guidelines are for an election. Now, what might be some of those guidelines that they might have broke? Basically, the company...
Normally, the NLRB sets out chargeable offenses, but that the employer and the employees could be charged for. The fact that there's outside interference from elected officials, the U.S. senator from that state as well as the governor, it puts us into territory that's a little different than what the NLRB contemplated, but I think it appears by the charges, which I have not read in detail, that UAW feels that there was enough coercion, because that is one of the issues that the NLRB would rule on if it were the employer having that kind of a punitive impact on the workforce and a chilling effect on workers' ability to collectively decide. I think what you're talking about, Kyle, is that there should be no interference, that workers should determine by themselves whether or not to collectively come together to be represented. And that's not a place where the employer's point of view is wanted, warranted, or welcomed under the law and the rules of the NLRB. I think that's what you're referring to.
That's a pretty good explanation. I put you on the spot there.
Yeah, you
but
did.
Okay, so, I think people understand that what happened in Tennessee is another, it's this direction that we're going. It's an anti-union, anti-worker campaign, and it's not just there, it's here, it's everywhere across the country. And we're gonna have to get out there and get active to beat that, Something else that's going on lately is the Longshoremen who are still locked out in Vancouver and Portland at the grain elevators are coming up on their 1-year anniversary of being locked out at the Vancouver granary. And that's the 27th of February. It's kind of a sad anniversary. I don't think there's going to be any parties going on. Hopefully, I know that they're meeting and they're still negotiating. Hopefully we see that resolved. Is there anything you want to say on that, Rick?
Well, definitely. What's happening in Vancouver and what has happened up here in Longview as well with the EGT setup, certainly it's making workers more aware of what's happening in this country, how labor, and I'm going to say particularly unions, are being fought against to try to delete their abilities to really represent their people. Such as in Longview, you have contracts, you have language you go by, and these are the things that are necessary for a labor union to function properly so that its members can receive the best from it. And then when you have organizations such as the grain terminals, especially down in Vancouver and Portland at this time, that are trying to eliminate a lot of that, and that adversely affects how, employees can benefit from their representation. It's truly a sad situation, and here it is a year already and still not resolved, but I'm sure we can all hope that in the near future this will be resolved in a way that will benefit the employees that are represented by the Longshore Union.
On a personal note, I am a longshoreman here in Longview, Local 21, and we do spend our fair share of time on the picket line with our brothers and sisters down there in Vancouver and Portland. And going on a year, that takes its toll. And we're picketing, but they're the ones that are locked out, that aren't working. That's a big chunk of work for them in Portland and Vancouver. And it's sad, when they've been locked out for an entire year and they're struggling to make ends meet with their families and putting food on the table and this and that. It's tough. Lori, anything on that real quick?
I think that it's just pretty much a microcosm what's happening in Vancouver and Portland here with the grain elevators, the employers. It looks like it's local. It looks like it's local, but it's hugely driven by multinational corporations. And so what's happening is the decisions are made somewhere else, way somewhere else, and it travels along these lines and comes here. If there was any way to convince me that you have to look behind what's happening in your neighborhood because someone else is pulling the strings. It's like a puppet. It's like a puppeteer is back there pulling the strings, and it's affecting folks here in Longview. It's affecting folks where I live in Bellingham, affecting folks where I live, where we all live and where we all work. And so we have to take a step back and look and see, is there some big entity back there or a coalition or conglomerate that's moving the strings? And we have to be aware of that because we have to fight it.
It's hard to negotiate and sit across the table from, somebody that's not from your neck of the woods, per se. You might be dealing with somebody that does not know your community, doesn't know your union, and you're not going to get along very well with that person when all their mindset is profits. So Let's go ahead and move on to, which one do you want to do first? Our agenda, or you want to talk about right to work for less?
Do the agenda first, and end
All
up with-
right. What do we got? What's the most important thing that the State Labor Council is working on this year in the legislature?
So the state labor, thank you for asking that question. No, Kyle, I'm really delighted that you asked me to come and talk a little bit here on your show about the State Labor Council's legislative agenda. As you know, we're about 3/4 of the way through this year's short session. And that means that things move very quickly, and it means that sometimes big things get accomplished and sometimes big things don't get accomplished. An example of what I'm talking about by that is a big thing that could have gotten accomplished, and well, there's still a week or so left, is a transportation package. That would put a lot of people to work. That would put a lot of businesses in a little better shape, a lot of local vendors that supply construction work, and that would be a good thing for all of us. Taxes would go into the coffers to pay for schools. It all goes around in a circle. What we are seeing, however, is that probably we're not going to have a transportation package. But what the Labor Council did with all of the affiliates this year was something I'm pretty proud of. Sat down and worked with all of the labor lobbyists and all of the affiliates that participate in the Olympia legislative efforts, and said, can we put together a platform by which we can say and demonstrate, if we do these things, it will add prosperity to the Washington working class, to workers across the state and their families, not just union families, all families. Because if we're talking about paid sick days or even raising the minimum wage, which we're not going to dwell on today because I know you've talked about it before, but for unions, the minimum wage is not necessarily, many unions, workers earn much more than the minimum wage, and or somewhat more. But we all have relatives, some of whom we help out on a monthly basis, who make the minimum wage. And so if they didn't need our subsidy, we'd all do better. If they didn't need a subsidy at all, they'd do better. So the Shared Prosperity Agenda to rebuild the middle class is what we called it. And we said, this is a way for us to look and measure the quality of our legislators' votes and how they support working families and our communities. So one of the key components, there was 4 pillars of this. Minimum wage was one, obviously. One of them is ending wage and revenue theft, and that's kind of important. Most employers do the right thing, pay the wages earned, pay their taxes, and they're good corporate citizens, good business citizens. They're local businesses, they're our neighbors. But there are those that are unscrupulous, and when those employers take advantage of workers by taking the labor and then not paying the remuneration, those are the same employers who very likely aren't going to pay unemployment insurance taxes, labor and industry premiums, and other kinds of taxes that they owe that we use in order to populate the services we want as a state. Schools, public health, law enforcement, emergency services, those sorts of things that we all care about and that make our communities livable. So, so ending wage and revenue theft was a key component of this 4-pillared prosperity agenda. The second was to pass paid sick days. One of the amazing things we found out was that it's not just people who are earning minimum wage who don't get sick leave. There are a lot of people who don't get sick leave at all, or who have a nearly impossible time taking the sick days that are even negotiated in their contracts. Union members, we found out during the lead up to the grocery strike, which thankfully didn't come to pass, up in Puget Sound, was that grocery workers who have a contract, who have health benefits, who have negotiated their wages, can't take sick pay out of their contract until the 3rd day they're sick. That means that they potentially can lose 2 days' pay in any week if they're really ill. And that's not good public health. It's not reasonable to say that a parent can't stay home and take care of a sick kid, or an ill spouse who's going through maybe chemotherapy. Those are the kinds of things that responsible societies should provide at least a foundational floor of. The third one that I'm going to talk about for a minute in depth is closing. There's a loophole in the Affordable Care Act that has allowed some very large employers to cut employees' hours under the threshold for health care requirements. And so those very large profitable companies are dumping their workers essentially onto our state Medicaid system. And so this one loophole closure would then say to those corporations, if you do that, we can't stop you, but we will send you a bill, because the state should not pay the bill for you cutting your workers' hours and keeping them away from insurance for themselves and their family. So we'll send you a bill and you can pay us back for the Medicaid that we had to give to your workers. Now, and then on minimum wage, the only thing I want to say is, while we started talking about the minimum wage, a year ago it was, should we raise it or shouldn't we? Now the conversation is, what's the right amount to raise it? So we have moved the needle on minimum wage, and that's been very good for the public debate, and it means that eventually it's going to be good for working families. So that's the 4 pillars of the prosperity agenda of the Labor Council this year. I will tell you that much of it passed, at least through committees in the House. Some of it passed off the floor. As it moved to the Senate, we expect that none of it will pass. Democratic Senator Rodney Tom has made common cause with the Senate Republicans, and they have blocked every piece of our prosperity agenda that has come their way. And it's something that obviously will allow us to have comprehensive conversations with those legislators when they come home after they're done with the legislative session. So
Absolutely.
I hope that was short enough but clear enough so that people understand. I have one last thing to say about this. None of this prosperity agenda is at the expense of government. None of this is increasing the cost of taxes, state or local. What this is saying that there are employers who are sloughing off their costs of being in business to us, the taxpayer, and to our government, local and state government. And this agenda says, we're going to tell you, you have to pay the cost of doing business. You're making plenty of money. The state shouldn't be subsidizing you anymore. So it needs to be clear that none of this prosperity agenda is an increase in taxes for any of us. It's essentially making corporations that are very profitable pay the cost of doing business.
You could probably say that most businesses play by the rules and do the right thing on a lot of these things, like wage theft.
Yes.
But this would make it more competitive, I guess, and keep some of these employers from cheating the system, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think you don't see wage and revenue theft, or that concept of trying to skim off the sides or skim off the work. You don't see that in every industry. You see it a lot in some industries. Floor covering is a very good example. Painting. If you're a commercial painter, there would be wage theft. There would be unscrupulous employers in a higher proportion. Roofers, for example. So some of that residential construction is a place where it's particularly concerning. And that is not to say that residential construction anywhere, including Cowlitz County, is bad. We're just saying that these are places where it's observed, in warehousing, and other occupations that I haven't named.
Well, Rick, we've talked quite a bit about the minimum wage in the last couple shows, and I think everybody's been talking about it lately. Is there any of these that you see is going to make a big change? Any of these you have a...
Well, I think all of them would help the workers of the state. And I think the important thing to realize is what Lori mentioned earlier. You know, she mentioned that it's not going to cost the state anything. When we think of the state, it's the citizens that pay the taxes. So it's not going to cost any of the citizens any extra to implement any of these things in the shared prosperity agenda, whether it's to end wage and revenue theft, close the loopholes on the affordable health care, or paid sick days. So as individuals, we have been subsidizing those, and I'm going to use the word unscrupulous employers rather, that have been costing, you know, revenue coming out of the taxpayers' pockets to supplement on, whether it's on housing, on food stamps, or on medical. So definitely this, if all these passed, and as Lori mentioned, they probably won't, because seem to be in an election year and things don't go too well in election years. That's why we don't have a transportation package. You know, politicians are being politicians. They're not interested in what's best for the citizens of our state. So definitely, if these things could pass, and hopefully this word will get out to the Senate, and instead of just thinking of an election year thing, let's look at wage and revenue theft, let's take care of it. The loopholes in the Affordable Health Care Act, take care of it, and provide, you know, paid sick days for employees that need it. So again, it's not a cost to the citizens, but it would be a cost just to those that can well afford to take care of it.
All of these are designed to strengthen the middle class, and it's not just union members, it's all working people. We've talked about right to work on the last show, and I love to call it right to work for less, because that's really what it is. Lori, I know you've worked on this quite a bit. I think the State Labor Council's been, you know, holding classes and educating, trying to educate our members on what this means, because there's a possibility we could be seeing it, you know, sometime in the future in Washington and Oregon. It's, I think it's on the ballot this year, unfortunately.
They're collecting signatures. I think they anticipate it'll make the ballot.
I think that might just be for public employees in Oregon, but anyways, this is something that we need to get out in front of and educate our members and the public on what this means. So what can you tell me about right to work?
Well, you know, and it is a misnomer. It's right to work. It sounds good. It sounds like it's freedom, and it's at its highest level. What right to work has been in every state that has enacted it has been an attack on the middle class. Right to work laws, they've led to lower wages and worse benefits for workers. That doesn't seem like freedom to me. Freedom means to me that we all advance and go forward, that we don't have a couple people or a couple of entities going forward and the majority of us going backwards. You know, 6 out of 10 states with the highest unemployment have right to work laws in place. And the working people in right to work states, they struggle more with poverty. There's less spending on education. One of the things that's really key to me, and you, I mean, Kyle, you acknowledged you're a longshoreman. You have an industry where safety is paramount because injuries happen. And of course, you too, Rick, come out of an industry where safety is paramount because injuries happen. And one of the things that we know, and the Tesoro explosion is a microcosm. That happened here up in Anacortes when the refinery, a part of the refinery blew up. But the steelworkers, National Steelworkers, tell us that in right to work states, the death rate, not the injury rate, the death rate goes up exponentially. And in fact, in measuring it, there's 172% higher death rate in right to work states than Washington has right now.
Wow.
That's a lot of people going to work in the morning and not coming home at night. So we need to have professional voices in this debate. Organized labor has been a vital advocate to protect all workers for safety and health. this is one of the places where having an opportunity to come together and collectively speak for working people, not just union people, but for all people, is very important. Now, you hear the talk about freedom. We should be free to join a union, free not to join a union, and that's one of the primary things people say about right to work. But you know, people are already free to work where they want and to join a union or not. That's the law. The law says in Washington, you don't have to join a union. You do, however, have to pay a share of the fees that it costs to represent you and to protect the rights that have been negotiated by your coworkers and their representatives with your employer. That's paying your fair share. This is America. We don't believe in freeloaders. We believe people pay their fair share and move forward. So it's very important not to be fooled by those who tell you that right to work is going to make you more free. While you have to pay a share of the fees that it costs to represent all of you and to maintain the benefits and the safety conditions in the contract and the terms of the contract, no one can force you ever to join the union as an organization. You don't have to join, you don't have to become a member, you're not forced to go to a meeting, and you're never forced to vote. That's the law of the land right now. So you're about as free as you can get. Now, if you decide you don't want to pay your fair share, you're free to take another job. So it's a different way of laying out how we talk about freedom. Right to work advocates will tell you that it makes you free to say no and take less. And eventually you will take less because there will be fewer people paying to support the benefits standard that the community wants to live by. But just think a minute, if the wages in your contract go down and so do your neighboring contracts and they get lower, then the income that's being contributed in your community and the money that's getting spent at the grocery store, the barber shop, the mom that needs to go buy the kids' athletic bags so that they, for their high school gym bags, all of those kinds of things that we share. Those are the places we go and we shop and we purchase so that we share our income with our neighbors. Those things stop happening. And if those things stop happening, then the proportion that we pay to make sure that we have fire trucks that show up when we call 911, public health services so that our water is clean, and that our sewer septic tanks are treated, those things go away too. Oh yeah, and the people that inspect our restaurants so that we don't get a terrible case of disease from going out to eat on Friday night. Mm-hmm. So it's actually, those are the kinds of things, longer response times for emergency services, fewer nurses who work longer hours, more part-time work because it's cheaper for the employer, more dangerous working conditions. If that's what the people who are advocating right to work want to tell us is freedom, then I think that they want to live in a different community than you and I do. So it's just as important to be thoughtful about what you mean when you say free. When we're free now to choose not to be a member, but still have to pay our fair share and not be a freeloader, that to me embodies how we believe America and Americans should behave toward one another, especially in towns and communities like Longview here where we are, and Bellingham where I live.
Washington has always been one of the most prosperous states in the country, and there's a reason for that. We have a strong union background, and it's one of the strongest union states in the country. And when you look at the right to work states, what do you see? They're not nearly, the wealth is not distributed, not nearly as prosperous states, injuries in the workplace and deaths and lack of representation because of these laws.
Great anecdote from our neighbor to the east in Idaho. They're now talking about raising their minimum wage, which of course is set at the federal minimum wage, because they're realizing that there's not enough income in the households at the federal minimum wage for them to be able to buy the goods and services they need to make their economy grow and expand. I was a very young trade unionist when Right to Work in Idaho went into effect. And the good people on the Washington side of the border maintained a billboard for many years that said, if Right to Work is so good, why are you coming to work in Washington? But the truth is that it, particularly in those states that have just hung on perniciously to the idea of their freedom to not associate and not to work collectively as workers, to have a conversation with their employer and to talk on an equal playing field, are now finding that they painted themselves into a bit of a corner.
Mm-hmm. Rick, we've been beating this horse for a little bit now. What, you got anything more on Right to Work?
You know, not as much on Right to Work. I mean, Lori pretty much epitomized it all. She said exactly what it is and how states are affected by it. So I hope as the citizens of our state here look at really the benefits of not being right to work versus the benefits of being right to work, and just go forward and help their neighbors, their family, all these people understand what will or will not come out of Right to Work.
Sounds good. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and I want to thank Rick, of course, for always being here for me, and our friend Lori from the state.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for the explanations, and we hope to have you on here again and do some more topics later on. I want to thank everybody for watching, and if you want to come visit us, our meetings are open to all union members and union retirees. They're the second Monday of the month at 5:30 p.m. at 536 Oregon Way. You can visit us on Facebook and YouTube. Just search for our Labor Council name. Thanks for watching.